The coffee grew cold on the worn wooden table as Sebastian Miller held the letter in trembling hands. The yellowed envelope shook between his arthritic fingers, and the sound of the autumn rain against the small house's aluminum window seemed to amplify the silence that had fallen over the kitchen. It was 3:30 p.m. on an ordinary Thursday, but nothing would ever be ordinary after this moment. Truth never dies, it only sleeps. The words were written in elegant script on the back of the envelope in fading blue ink. Sebastian recognized the handwriting. It wasn't Clara's, but there was something familiar about the careful strokes, as if he had seen this writing somewhere in the distant reaches of his memory. Inside the envelope, an old photograph made him gasp. Clara was there, visibly older, her grey hair pulled back in a simple bun, her face etched with wrinkles that told stories of years spent far from home. Beside her were three young adults with eyes Sebastian knew better than his own. The same almond-shaped eyes Clara had inherited from her mother, Rose, who died when Clara was only 12. The same eyes he saw in the mirror every morning in younger, more innocent versions. Lucas, Leah, and Levi, his grandchildren, alive. The back of the photograph had geographical coordinates scrawled in pencil. 2.8014 in 6521, and a date, September 15, 2015. Sebastian rushed to the old atlas he kept on the living room shelf, the yellowed pages creaking under his anxious fingers. Amazonas, a remote village lost in the vast green expanse of the rainforest, over 1,200 miles from Oak Haven. 30 years. 30 years of weekly visits to the cemetery, of conversations with an empty headstone, of sleepless nights imagining what might have happened that terrible December morning in 1985. 30 years of guilt for not preventing Clara's marriage, to Roger for not intervening when the signs of violence became too obvious to ignore. The memory of that last night still haunted him. The screams that echoed down the street, the sound of breaking dishes, the muffled cries of the children. Sebastian had run to his daughter's house, but Roger didn't open the door. "Everything's fine, Mr. Miller," he shouted through the wood, his voice slurred by drink. "Clara's resting." The next morning, the house was empty. No signs of a struggle, no goodbye note, only the brutal silence that had swallowed his entire family. Sebastian tucked the photograph into his shirt pocket and walked to the room where he kept Clara's things. Clothes he had never been able to donate, the triplets' toys that still smelled of childhood, love letters she had written to a teenage boyfriend. Everything preserved as a sanctuary of hope he'd never admitted to losing. That night, Sebastian couldn't sleep. He sat in the living room armchair, the photograph in his hands, staring at the faces of the grandchildren he hadn't seen grow up. Lucas had his grandfather's strong features, the square jaw and determined eyes. Leah smiled with the same shy sweetness Clara had as a child. Levi, the youngest of the triplets by a few minutes, seemed to carry a weight on his shoulders that Sebastian recognized, the same weight he himself had carried for 3 decades. The next morning, Sebastian went to the bank and withdrew his savings. He sold the old television, pawned the gold watch he had received when he retired from the railroad, and bought the cheapest ticket he could find to Manaus. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. There was no one to tell. Roger had died of cirrhosis 5 years after the family's disappearance, taking with him any possibility of answers. The neighbors who had witnessed the screams that night were also dead or had moved away. Sebastian was the last guardian of Clara's memory, and now he had a chance to find the truth. The flight to Manaus was his first plane trip. Sebastian gripped the armrest during takeoff, his stomach churning from the altitude and anxiety. Through the window, he watched Oak Haven shrink until it became an insignificant point in the landscape, and he wondered if he would ever return home. The small inland town with its dirt roads and simple houses, seemed a world away from the vast green expanse that stretched beneath the clouds. In Manaus, it took Sebastian 2 days to find someone willing to take him to the coordinates on the photograph. Most of the local guides shook their heads when they heard the name of the village, São Benedito das Águas Profundas. "Very far place, sir," they said. "Very difficult to get there." But Sebastian had money, and money spoke louder than difficulties. Joachim, a middle-aged riverman with calloused hands and tired eyes, finally agreed to make the trip. "I know that place," he said, spitting on the dirt floor. "My sister lives there. Strange people, very closed off. They don't like outsiders." Sebastian paid half the fee up front and boarded the small boat that would take him upriver, through narrow channels and murky waters that reflected the sky like broken mirrors. The boat trip lasted 4 days. Sebastian slept in a hammock strung between 2 posts, his body aching from the uncomfortable position, but his mind too preoccupied to complain. Joachim spoke little, concentrating on navigating the meanders of the river, avoiding submerged logs and sandbanks that appeared without warning. At night, when they stopped to rest, Sebastian listened to the sounds of the rainforest, crickets, frogs, the distant cry of monkeys, and felt more alone than ever. "Your daughter," Joachim said on the 3rd night, breaking the silence as he prepared coffee over a makeshift fire. "What happened to her?" Sebastian hesitated. He wasn't used to talking about Clara to strangers, but there was something in Joachim's honest simplicity that made him open his heart. He told him about the disappearance, about the years of searching, about the photograph that had changed everything. Joachim listened in silence, stirring the embers with a stick. "I've heard stories like this before," he finally said. "Women who vanish overnight, husbands who claim they ran off with other men, police who never find anything." He looked at Sebastian through the campfire smoke. "But sometimes, sir, disappearing is the only way to survive." St. Benedict's deep waters appeared on the 4th day like a mirage among the trees. Wooden houses built on stilts rose above the dark water, connected by narrow bridges that creaked underfoot. Children ran naked along the walkways, diving into the river with joyous cries that echoed through the forest. Women washed clothes on the banks, their voices blending in a symphony of dialects and accents that Sebastian couldn't identify. The arrival of strangers didn't go unnoticed. Sebastian felt the curious and distrustful stares following him as he walked through the village, Joachim at his side, serving as a kind of silent translator. Conversations stopped as they approached, resuming in whispers after they passed. "They're scared," Joachim explained. "People from the city sometimes bring trouble. Police, government, people who ask questions they don't want to answer." Sebastian showed the photograph to some of the older residents, but they all shook their heads or looked away. It was as if Clara and the grandchildren were ghosts that no one wanted to see. Frustration grew in his chest, mixed with the fear that he had made a journey of thousands of miles based on a vain hope. It wasn't until the 2nd day that a woman approached. She must have been about 50, her grey hair tied in a colorful scarf, her dark eyes etched with deep wrinkles. Sebastian was sitting in the small guest house where Joachim had secured a room, watching the village bustle through the window when she knocked on the door. "You're Clara's father," she said without preamble. It wasn't a question. Sebastian's heart leaped. "You know her?" The woman looked around, checking to make sure no one was nearby, and entered the room. "I'm Benedicta," she said, closing the door behind her. "Clara told me a lot about you." Sebastian rose from the bed, his legs shaky. "Where is she? Are my grandchildren all right?" Benedicta gestured for him to sit down. "Calm down, sir. There's a lot you need to know before you see her." She pulled up a chair and sat facing him, her hands clasped in her lap. Clara arrived here in January 1986, with 3 young children and fear in her eyes. She said she had fled from a husband who wanted to kill her. The story Benedicta told in the next few minutes made Sebastian's world collapse and rebuild at the same time. Clara hadn't disappeared by chance. She was part of an underground network of women who helped victims of domestic violence escape extreme situations. The network had begun in the 1970s, when Benedicta and other women realized that the police and authorities not only ignored cases of violence, but often protected the abusers. Back then, sir, a woman who was beaten by her husband had nowhere to run, Benedicta explained, her voice low but firm. The police said it was a family problem. The priests said she should be more obedient. The judges sent her back home to fulfill her role as a wife. The network operated in absolute secrecy. Women at risk were identified by neighbors, teachers, nurses, anyone who had access and awareness. When the situation became unbearable, they were removed from their homes in the dead of night and taken to safe places. False documents were provided, stories invented, new identities created. It was a primitive but effective system, maintained by the silent solidarity among women who understood what it meant to live in fear. Clara was one of those who helped us the most after she arrived here, Benedicta continued. She had gone. To high school, she could read and write well. She helped the other women organize themselves, plan their escapes. We saved dozens of lives over the years. Sebastian felt tears burning in his eyes. Why didn't she ever look for me? Why didn't she tell me she was alive? Benedicta's face saddened. She wanted to, sir. Many times she talked about her father, how much she missed him. But she was afraid that Roger would find out where she was. She was afraid he would find her and harm the children. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Clara told me that Roger had threatened to kill the triplets if she tried to leave. Him. She said he had contacts in the police, that he could find her anywhere. The truth hurt more than the uncertainty. Sebastian realized that Clara had chosen to protect her children at the expense of her own happiness, sacrificing the possibility of reuniting with her family to ensure the safety of her children. It was a choice only a desperate mother could make. Where is she now? Sebastian asked, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Benedicta hesitated. 3 years ago, Clara was diagnosed with cancer. The nearest treatment is in Manaus, but she didn't want to leave here. She said St. Benedict's was her home, that she preferred to die in peace than live in fear elsewhere. The world stopped. Sebastian felt as if someone had stolen the air from his lungs. She died? No, sir, but she's very weak. That's why she sent the letter. She wanted to see you before... Benedicta didn't finish the sentence. Sebastian stood up, staggering. Take me to her. Now. Clara's house was located in the highest part of the village, a simple wooden structure with a small vegetable garden in the back. Sebastian recognized the plants she cultivated: basil, rosemary, mint, the same herbs Rosa planted in the backyard when Clara was a child. It was as if she had carried a piece of her childhood to that remote place. Clara was sitting in a rocking chair on the porch, knitting a child's sweater. When she saw Sebastian ascending the wooden steps, the needles fell from her hands. She was unrecognizable and perfectly familiar at the same time, her hair completely white, her face etched by illness, but her eyes still shining with the same light Sebastian remembered. "Papa," she whispered, and that was all she could say before collapsing into tears. Sebastian embraced her gently, feeling how frail she was, the bones prominent under her thin skin. She smelled of medicine and wildflowers, a scent that was entirely new, yet somehow familiar. They remained like that for minutes, weeping together, 30 years of separation dissolving in the warmth of the hug. "I thought you'd hate me," Clara said when she finally managed to speak. "I could never hate you," Sebastian replied, stroking his daughter's white hair. "I just wished you had come home." Clara pulled back slightly, wiping her eyes. I couldn't. Papa, he would have found us. He would have hurt the children. Her voice was weak, but there was a firmness in it that Sebastian didn't remember ever hearing before. I had to choose between being your daughter and being a mother to my children. I chose to be a mother. That afternoon, Clara recounted to Sebastian every detail of that terrible night in December 1985. Roger had come home drunk and violent, more so than usual. He had lost his job the previous week and blamed Clara for his misfortune. The argument started in the kitchen and spread throughout the house, the shouting echoing through the neighborhood. When he threatened to burn the triplets with a cigarette, Clara knew she could wait no longer. She had contacted the support network 3 months prior through a nurse at the health clinic who recognized the signs of abuse. The plan was ready, waiting only for the right moment. That night, when Roger collapsed onto the sofa in an alcoholic stupor, Clara quietly woke the children, gathered only the essentials, and slipped out the back door. Benedita was waiting for me around the corner with a car, Clara recalled. We traveled all night until we reached a farm in the countryside. There, I got new documents, Clarice Santos. The boys became John, Anna, and Joseph. We spent 6 months on the farm, then came here. Sebastian listened in silence, absorbing every word. The woman he thought he knew had revealed a courage he never imagined existed. Clara had not only saved her own life and her children's, but she had become part of something larger, a silent movement of resistance against violence. And the children? He asked. Do they know the truth? Clara's face tightened. They found out recently. When I got sick, I had no choice. They needed to understand why we've been living in hiding all these years. She looked down at her hands, her nails bitten down to the quick from anxiety. It wasn't easy for them. Levi was very angry, said I had stolen their childhood. Leah cried for days. Only Lucas understood. At that moment, 3 figures appeared on the path leading to the house. Sebastian immediately recognized the faces from the photograph, but seeing them in person was like a punch to the stomach. Lucas, tall and lean like his grandfather, with the calloused hands of someone who worked with wood. Leah, delicate but with a determined gaze, carrying a basket of wild berries. Levi, the youngest of the 3, with stooped shoulders and an expression of distrust on his face. Mum said you were coming, Lucas said, extending his hand to Sebastian. Lucas. The handshake was firm, but Sebastian felt the tension in his grandson's fingers. It was strange for all of them, this meeting that should have happened decades ago. Leah greeted him with a shy smile, but Levi only nodded, keeping his distance. He needs time, Clara explained as Levi retreated to the back of the house. He's the one who suffered the most from the change. He was always very attached to his roots, wanted to know where he came from, who his relatives were. When he found out we had a family he didn't know, he was upset. That night, Sebastian had dinner with Clara and his grandchildren at the small kitchen table. Lucas explained that he worked as a carpenter in the village, building houses and furniture for the residents. Leah had become a midwife, assisting local women during childbirth. Levi fished and hunted, providing meat for the community. They were simple lives, but there was a purpose in them that Sebastian admired. Are you happy here? He asked. It's the only life we've ever known, Leah replied. But now that we know the truth, sometimes I wonder what it would have been like to grow up somewhere else. Do you have any regrets? Lucas asked Clara. She thought for a moment, stirring her food. On her plate, I regret not being stronger sooner, for letting things get to that point, but I don't regret running away. You are alive and safe. That's what matters. Sebastian spent 5 days in the village, getting to know the life Clara had built. She took him to meet the other women in the network, stories of courage and survival that deeply impressed him. There was Rosangela, who had escaped a husband who locked her in the house for days, Marlene, who had escaped a relationship where she was forced into prostitution, Joanna, who had saved her 2 daughters from an abusive stepfather. "We are all sisters here," Benedita said one afternoon as they watched the children play in the river. "United by what we've been through, by what we've overcome. Clara taught us that it's not enough to survive. We have to help others survive too." It was during one of these conversations that Sebastian discovered the notebook. Clara called him into the bedroom, pointing to a wooden box under the bed. "There's something I want you to see," she said. Inside the box was a leather-bound notebook, filled with notes in Clara's careful handwriting. They were letters never sent to Sebastian, diaries of her life in the village, but mostly detailed documents about the support network. Names of women who had been helped, addresses of safe houses, contacts of people who collaborated with the network. More importantly, there was a list of authorities who had been bribed to ignore domestic violence cases. "This is dangerous," Sebastian said, flipping through the pages. "If it fell into the wrong hands." "That's why I kept it hidden all these years," Clara replied. "But now, with my death approaching, I need to decide what to do with this information. It could help other women, expose the corruption that allowed so many people to suffer. But it could also put our community at risk." Sebastian understood the dilemma. Reporting the system would mean exposing the network that had saved so many lives. But staying silent meant allowing injustice to continue. It was an impossible choice between protection and justice. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. Clara took his hand. "You decide, Dad. When I'm gone, you'll be the guardian of this story. I trust your wisdom." That night, Sebastian couldn't sleep. He walked through the village in the early hours of the morning, the sounds of the forest enveloping him like a blanket. He thought of Clara, the courage she had shown, the sacrifice she had made. He thought of the grandchildren he had met and the lost time he would never recover. He thought of all the women who still suffered in silence, waiting for someone to save them. At dawn, he found Levi sitting by the riverbank, skipping stones across the water. The youngest grandson had kept his distance during the entire visit, but something in his posture suggested he was ready to talk. "She's going to die, isn't she?" Levi asked without looking at Sebastian. "We all die someday," Sebastian replied, sitting beside his grandson. "But your mother will leave behind an important legacy." Levi skipped another stone, which ricocheted 3 times before sinking. "I hate her and love her at the same time. Is that wrong?" "No," Sebastian said. "It's human." And they sat in silence for a while, watching the river carry leaves and branches in its slow current. Sebastian realized that Levi was very much like Clara at his age, sensitive, introspective, carrying an emotional weight that seemed too heavy for his shoulders. "Will you take us away?" Levi finally asked. The question took Sebastian by surprise. "Do you want to leave here?" "I don't know. Sometimes I think about what it would be like to live in a big city, have a different profession, meet new people, but I'm also afraid. Here it's safe, here we're accepted." Levi looked at Sebastian for the first time. "Do you think we're cowards for hiding?" "I think you're survivors," Sebastian replied, "and survivors do what they need to do to keep living." On the 6th day, Clara had a crisis. Sebastian found her in the kitchen, doubled over in pain, vomiting blood into the sink. Lucas and Leah carried her to bed, while Benedita ran to fetch the village's only nurse. Sebastian held his daughter's hand, feeling it grow cold between his fingers. "It won't be today," Clara whispered, her voice weak, "but I can't pretend I have much time left." That night, gathered in the small living room, Clara made her last requests. She wanted to be buried in the village, beside other women from the network who had died over the years. She wanted the notebook to be used in whatever way Sebastian saw fit. and she wanted her children to know that she loved them more than life itself. "You can choose to stay here or go with Grandpa," she told the triplets. "I won't decide for you anymore. I've decided enough." Lucas was the first to speak. "I want to know the place where Mom grew up. I want to see the house where she lived, the streets where she played." Leah agreed. "Me too. I'm curious about our history, about the family we never knew." Everyone looked at Levi, who remained silent for a long time. "Can I come back if I don't like it?" he finally asked. "Always," Sebastian replied. "This will always be your home." Clara died 3 days later, on a sunny morning when the birds sang louder than usual. Sebastian was by her bedside, holding her hand, when she simply stopped, breathing. There was no struggle, no pain. It was as if she had finally found the peace she had sought for so many years. The funeral was simple but moving. The whole village attended, women and men who had been touched by Clara's presence over the years. Benedita spoke about the courage Clara had shown, about the example she left for all the women who were still fighting for freedom. Sebastian couldn't speak. The words seemed too small to express what he felt. Lucas, Leah and Levi decided to accompany Sebastian back to Oakhaven. It wasn't an easy decision, but Clara had planted in them a curiosity about their origins. They wanted to know the land where they were born, to understand where they came from, to decide where to go. The journey back was an emotional one. The triplets saw the world beyond the forest for the first time since childhood, marveling at cities, cars, technology that didn't exist in St. Benedict's. Sebastian watched them discover the world, remembering how Clara had reacted the same way as a child. Oakhaven had changed a lot in 30 years. Paved streets replaced the dirt roads, brick houses took the place of wooden constructions. But the essence of the small town remained. Everyone knew everyone, gossip spread faster than the wind, and life followed a leisurely pace that contrasted with the hustle and bustle of big cities. The arrival of Sebastian's grandchildren caused curiosity in the neighborhood. He explained that they were the children of a distant cousin who had died, and that he had decided to take care of them. It wasn't a lie, just an edited version of the truth. Lucas adapted quickly, finding work in a carpentry shop. Leah began helping at the health clinic, her skills as a midwife being welcome. Levi took longer to adjust, missing the freedom of the forest. It was Levi who asked the question Sebastian had been avoiding for months. "What are you going to do with Mom's notebook?" Sebastian had kept the notebook in the same place he kept Clara's things, but he knew he couldn't leave it there forever. The information it contained was too powerful to ignore, but also too dangerous to release carelessly. The answer came from an unexpected source. A journalist from São Paulo, Marcia Oliveira, was investigating cases of domestic violence in the 1980s for a series of reports on the evolution of women's rights in Brazil. She had uncovered references to the protection network in other documents and was searching for more detailed information. Sebastian received her on a Saturday afternoon, serving coffee at the same table where he had read Clara's letter months before. Marcia was a woman in her 40s, serious but kind, who listened with respectful attention. "I know this may be painful," she said, "but these stories need to be told. Many people still don't understand what it was like for women back then, how they had to fight to survive." Sebastian showed her some pages of the notebook, omitting specific names and locations. Marcia read silently, making careful notes. "This is extraordinary," she said. "A protection network operating decades before the first official shelter for women victims of violence. You were on the cutting edge." "It wasn't about being on the cutting edge," Sebastian replied. "It was about survival. When the system fails, people create their own systems." Marcia spent 3 days in Oakhaven, interviewing Sebastian and the triplets. Lucas talked about growing up without knowing his true identity. Leah about the impact of discovering she had a grandfather she'd never known. Levi remained mostly silent, but on the last day he opened up about the anger he felt at being deprived of choices. "I understand why she did what she did," he told the journalist, "but I also feel like my childhood was stolen. I grew up not knowing who I really was, without real roots. That leaves a mark on a person." Marsh's report was published 6 months later, a 5-part series that exposed not only the protection network, but also police corruption and the negligence of authorities that allowed so many women to suffer in silence. Names were omitted, locations altered, but the essence of the story remained intact. The repercussions were immediate. Human rights lawyers contacted them, offering support for deeper investigations. Women's protection organizations requested details on how the network operated, wanting to implement similar methods. Politicians used the story to justify new laws protecting victims of domestic violence. But there were also negative reactions. Sebastian received threatening anonymous phone calls, people saying he should have left the past buried. One night, someone threw a rock at his window with a note attached. "Careful, old man. Some dead should stay dead." Lucas found Sebastian the next morning sweeping up the broken glass from the living room. "Do you regret talking to the journalist?" he asked. Sebastian stopped sweeping and looked at his grandson. "Your mother kept these secrets for 30 years to protect you. Now that you're safe, it's time to use these secrets to protect other people." The decision to reveal more details about the network wasn't taken lightly. Sebastian returned to the Amazon, this time accompanied by Lucas, to talk to Benedita and the other women. They were divided. Some wanted the story told completely, others feared the consequences. Clara always said that a day would come when we would have to choose between our safety and the greater good, Benedita said during a meeting with the women of the village. Maybe that day has arrived. The discussion lasted for hours. Stories were shared, fears exposed, hopes debated. In the end, they voted for controlled disclosure. They would allow more details to be released, but maintaining rigorous protocols to protect identities and locations. Back in Oakhaven, Sebastian began working with Marcia on a full biography of Clara. It would be a book that told not only her story, but the story of all the women who were part of the network. A testament to silent courage, to the power of female solidarity, to the strength of mothers willing to sacrifice everything for their children. The writing process was cathartic but painful. Sebastian relived every moment of the search for Clara, every sleepless night wondering what might have happened to her. But he also discovered aspects of his daughter he had never known. Her strategic intelligence, her leadership ability, her skill in inspiring other women to find courage. Levi made the suggestion that would change everything. "Why don't we create a foundation in Mom's name," he said one night during dinner. "Something that continues the work she did, but in a legal, official way." The idea took shape slowly. The Clara Miller Foundation would be a non-profit organization dedicated to helping women victims of domestic violence. It would use modern methods, legal shelters, psychological support, legal assistance, but would maintain the spirit of the original network: solidarity, mutual protection, empowerment. Lucas became president of the foundation, using his carpentry skills to renovate an abandoned building in the center of Oakhaven that would become the first official shelter. Leah would coordinate health services, providing medical and psychological care to women and children. Levi, initially reluctant, eventually found his purpose working with the children of the victims, helping them cope with the trauma of violence. Sebastian watched his grandson's work and saw Clara in every gesture, every decision, every moment of compassion. It was as if she had returned through them, multiplied into 3 different but equally dedicated versions of the cause she had embraced. The first shelter of the Clara Miller Foundation opened its doors on a rainy Saturday in May. exactly 2 years after Clara's death. Sebastian, with trembling hands, cut the symbolic ribbon, reflecting on the journey that had begun with an anonymous letter and culminated in this moment of tangible hope. The first woman to seek shelter was Carla, a 22-year-old who had fled home with her 3-year-old daughter after her husband threatened to burn the child with a clothing iron. When Sebastian saw her in the shelter hallway, holding her small daughter close to her chest, her eyes filled with fear and determination, it was like seeing Clara again that distant night in 1985. "You're safe now," he said to Carla, the words laden with all the times he wished he could have said them to Clara. The book about Clara was launched on the 3rd anniversary of her death. The launch ceremony took place at the shelter itself, attended by journalists, activists, politicians, and most importantly, women who had been helped by the foundation. Sebastian read an excerpt from the final chapter, where he described his reunion with Clara. "When I embraced my daughter after 30 years, I understood that true love isn't possessive. It's liberating. Clara hadn't abandoned me when she ran away. She had chosen to love her children more than herself, and in that choice, she found a strength that saved not only her family, but dozens of other families over the years." The audience wept. Sebastian also wept, but these were different tears from those he had shed during decades of mourning. They were tears of pride, of closure, of peace. After the ceremony, Sebastian walked to the small garden at the back of the shelter, where Lucas had planted the same herbs Clara used to grow in St. Benedict's deep waters. Basil, rosemary, mint, aromas that connected present and past, daughter and grandchildren, love and sacrifice. Benedita had come specifically for the launch, traveling outside the Amazon for the first time. She found Sebastian in the garden, watching the plants sway in the afternoon breeze. "Clara would be proud," she said, sitting beside him on the wooden bench Lucas had built. "Sometimes I feel like she's here," Sebastian replied. "Not as a ghost, but as a presence. As if all. This is a continuation of what she started." "That's right," said Benedita. "We don't die when our hearts stop. We die when we stop making a difference in people's lives." That evening, Sebastian dined with his grandchildren at the same table where he had received the letter that changed everything. Lucas talked about the foundation's expansion plans to other cities. Leah discussed the training course she was developing for healthcare professionals to deal with victims of violence. Levi, who had become the most eloquent of the three, described a project to create a national network of shelters based on the model Clara had helped develop decades earlier. "You know," said Sebastian, "your mother always believed that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they're united for a just cause. You are proof that she was right." After dinner, Sebastian went upstairs to his room and opened the drawer where he kept the letters Clara had written but never sent. He had read them hundreds of times, but he always found new details, new nuances of emotion. One of them, written 5 years after her escape, spoke of the dreams she had for her children. "Daddy, sometimes I dream that one day my boys will meet you, that they will sit at your table, hear your stories about the railroad, learn about our family. I know it's an impossible dream, but it's what keeps me strong. The hope that one day love will be stronger than fear." Sebastian smiled, putting the letter back in the drawer. Clara had been prophetic. Love had indeed proved stronger than fear. Not in the way she had imagined, not in the time she had expected, but in a way that multiplied its strength instead of simply preserving it. In the months that followed, Clara's story gained national attention. Documentaries were produced, plays were written, songs were composed. But Sebastian knew that his daughter's true legacy wasn't in posthumous fame, but in the lives transformed, daily through the foundation. One morning, he received a different letter, not anonymous like the one that had started it all, but signed by a woman named Regina, who lived in a small town in the interior of Bahia. She wrote, "Mr. Sebastian, I read about your daughter in the newspaper and wanted to tell my story. 15 years ago, I ran away from my husband with my 2 young children. A woman helped me, gave me money for the bus fare and the address of a safe house. I never knew her name, but now, seeing your daughter's picture in the newspaper, I'm sure it was Clara. She saved my life and the lives of my children. Today I am a teacher, my children are in college, and all this is because your daughter had the courage to help a stranger." Sebastian read the letter several times, his heart overflowing with pride. Clara had touched more lives than he had ever imagined, planting seeds of hope that continued to sprout decades later. That afternoon, he visited the cemetery for the first time since returning from the Amazon. Clara's symbolic grave remained untouched, but now Sebastian knew that she wasn't there. She was alive in the work of the foundation, in the women who found the courage to flee, in the children who grew up free from violence, in the grandchildren who had transformed pain into purpose. He placed a sprig of basil on the headstone, not because Clara was there, but because that gesture represented continuity, the connection between generations, the love that transcends physical death. Leaving the cemetery, Sebastian found Levi waiting at the gate. The youngest grandson had developed a habit of walking through the city when he needed to think, and the cemetery had become one of his frequent destinations. "I still feel angry. Sometimes," Levi said as they walked together through the streets of Oak Haven, "angry for wasting so much time without knowing you, angry for not having a choice in our lives. But I also understand that anger is part of the process." "Your mother felt anger too," Sebastian replied. "Anger at the system that failed to protect her, anger at the men who hurt women, anger at her own situation. But she channeled that anger into action." "That's what we're doing, isn't it?" Levi said. "Turning anger into action." Sebastian nodded. That's exactly what they were doing. 5 years after receiving the first letter, Sebastian celebrated his 83rd birthday, surrounded by a family he had found when he least expected it. The Clara Miller Foundation, now operated in 12 cities, had helped over 300 families and had become a national reference in assisting victims of domestic violence. Lucas had married one of the foundation's social workers and was expecting their first child. Lisha coordinated a training program that was being copied by organizations across the country. Levi had written a book about his experience as the son of a woman on the run, becoming a speaker in schools and universities. During the birthday party, Sebastian received a special gift, a collective letter signed by 100 women who had been helped by the foundation. Each briefly recounted her story, thanking him for the second chance they had received. One of them wrote, "Thank you for showing us that it's possible to start over, that it's possible to transform survival into life." That night, before going to sleep, Sebastian opened Clara's notebook again. This time, he went straight to the last page, where she had written her final words. "If anyone ever reads this, I want them to know I didn't run away out of cowardice. I ran away out of love. Love for my children, for the other women who suffered like me, for the future I believed was possible. If my story can inspire a single person not to give up, then every day of exile, every night of longing, every moment of fear was worth it. Love always wins, even when it seems lost." Sebastian closed the notebook and looked out the window. Outside, Oak Haven slept peacefully, its streets illuminated by streetlights that didn't exist when Clara was a child. The city had changed, the world had changed, but the essence of what Clara had taught remained, that it's possible to resist, that it's possible to protect, that it's possible to win. He thought about the anonymous letter he had received 5 years earlier, the sentence that had changed his life. Truth never dies, it only sleeps. Now he understood that it wasn't just about the truth about Clara's disappearance, but the greater truth about the power of maternal love, about the strength, of solidarity, about the human capacity to transform tragedy into hope. Truth never dies. And Clara Miller, even absent, continued to live in the truth she had left for the world, that some escapes are not giving up, but acts of silent courage that resonate through generations, saving lives that haven't even been lived yet. Sebastian fell asleep that night with a smile on his face, knowing that he had fulfilled the silent promise he had made the day he found Clara dying in the Amazon. He had protected her story, honored her sacrifice, and ensured that her legacy would live on. Outside, the autumn rain began to fall, washing the streets of Oak Haven and preparing the ground for new plantings, new hopes, new beginnings. And somewhere, in the collective memory of the city, Clara Miller smiled, knowing that her escape 30 years ago had transformed into the freedom of hundreds of other women. Truth never dies. It only transforms into something greater than we could ever imagine.